Okay, now let's talk about prokaryotic cells in particular. So these would include those groups, the bacteria and archaea. These are the two groups within the prokaryotes. Now, so what do all cells have? Well, they're all going to have a cell membrane, which you want to remember about a cell membrane, regardless of what kind of organism it is. It's going to be semi-permeable. Its job is to control what gets in and out of the cell. All cells are going to have some DNA, regardless of whether or not they have a nucleus. And of course, the DNA serves as the hereditary material. And they'll all have some ribosomes, which are involved with protein synthesis. Alright, so here's a diagram of a typical bacterium and then an electron micrograph, a picture made using an electron microscope. Again, for scale, these prokaryotes, again, are usually 1 to 10 microns in size. They're pretty small. You can see them with a light microscope, but you really can't see these kind of details that you can with a scanning electron microscope. Okay, so they're all unicellular, although some of them do clump together, but they act as individual cells. And what do we have? Well, inside we have a region where the DNA is. It's called the nucleoid. It's not contained within the nucleus, but it is sort of clustered in the center of the cell, if you will. Of course, we've got the plasma membrane, again, that regulates what comes in and out. Bacteria typically have a cell wall outside the cell membrane, which gives the cell its shape and a certain strength and rigidity. They'll often have this thing, the glycocalyx, or otherwise known as the capsule. If you want to remember it as capsule, that's fine with me. Sort of a gelatinous, sticky material that sort of protects the cell and helps hold the cell in place wherever it is. In particular, it has some extensions called these fimbria of the capsule, again, that help hold the cell where it is. We have the flagellum that some bacterial cells have, which is for moving around. And when bacterial cells get together with other bacterial cells, they do it's not exactly sexual reproduction, but it's sort of a form of it, or sort of like it, in which they exchange genetic material. And what they do is they have these extensions of the cell that connect those two bacterial cells. It's called a sex pilus, and it's, again, how they transfer DNA between each other. I wouldn't worry too much about these parts here. And of course, but we do want to know ribosomes, as we say. They're involved with protein synthesis. Alright, and again, the types we have are the bacteria, which are the sort of majority of prokaryotes that we see today, found in all sorts of habitats all over the place with various jobs. We sometimes think of them as being pathogens, disease-causing organisms, which some of them are, but a lot of them are involved with as decomposers out in the natural system in the woods and the soil, and they play an important role of recycling materials. Some live inside animals and are therefore mutualists. They sort of are beneficial to us, and particularly they live in our gut and help with digestion. And so those are two important jobs that bacteria play. The other, get the spelling right, the archaea, A-E-A, they are sometimes known as the extremophiles because they live in or love extreme environments like hot springs or very salty conditions. And there are some that live exclusively in anoxic or oxygen-free environments. There are also some bacteria that do as well, although the majority of bacteria would be aerobic, but there are some that are anaerobic. They can get by without oxygen. And in fact, for some of them, the presence of oxygen is toxic to them, so they have to live in those kind of places. Where would you find such places? Well, you could find them in the sediments of swamps, basically in the soils of swamps. It gets pretty oxygen free there. In the guts of some animals, like cows, they'll have some of these oxygen loving or microbes that don't like oxygen in them. Okay, so that's bacteria. Let's start eukaryotic cells and see how far we get here. So now we're moving up to the majority of types of organisms that we see today, including us. So animals, plants, fungi, protista. We'll study this diversity in more detail later on, but they're all eukaryotes, so they have a relatively complex cell structure with lots of membrane-bound organelle. If we back up for a second, something like a ribosome would be considered an organelle within a bacterial cell, and also within a eukaryotic cell, but there we go. It's not a membrane-bound organelle, but in eukaryotes we see a lot of these organelles like mitochondria, the Golgi apparatus, endoplasmic reticulum, vesicles, and what am I looking for here? I'm looking for lysosomes, wherever they are. They might not be on this diagram. Oh, there we go. Lysosomes. These are all organelles that are surrounded by one, sometimes two membranes. And you can think of them as sort of like the organs of the cell. Like your organs, your heart, your liver, your kidney have a particular job. The organelles inside of a cell have a particular job that we'll talk about in a moment. Of course, surrounded by a plasma membrane consisting of a double layer of phospholipids, having a nucleus. Inside that nucleus is a region called the nucleolus, which is where RNA is made. The membrane of the nucleus is sometimes referred to as the nuclear envelope. And the DNA is often in what we would call the chromatin state. It's relatively diffuse and uncondensed, and it just kind of is spread throughout the nucleus. Alright, so plasma membrane, again, mostly made of a double layer of phospholipids with the phosphate end on the outside, on either side, and those fatty acid tails on the inside, again being hydrophobic and the phospholipid end being hydrophilic. Just remember that the liquid inside the cell and the liquid that sort of bathes the cells on the outside is a water-based solution, so the phospholipids are again on the outside. We have proteins embedded in that membrane. Typically a lot of integral proteins, the one that span the membrane, involved with again things like transport, gluing cells together, cell recognition, sometimes acting as enzymes, many different jobs. Of course, cholesterol in that membrane. We talked about that type of lipid that gives membranes a certain fluidity.